How's everybody doing this morning? Yeah, sorry for that obnoxiously long bio. Like, who the heck wrote that? Basically, all you really need to know is I'm a recovering grade 9 teacher. That's all you really need to know. I taught grade 9 for 4 years at École Calvin High School. Is anyone ever, is there any Calvinites here? Yes, there's usually few in the audience. They all infect and take over the world and do things over there. So, it's very nice to be here, but I remember my very first day as a teacher, I had to walk in. You know, I grew up, I'm Anishinaabe from Selkirk. Anybody Selkirk people here? Any Selkirks? Selkirks over there? So I grew up in Selkirk, and I remember my very first day, I walked into Calvin High School. My principal was Bob Wilkes, who went on to become a superintendent. And it was his final gig as a principal. And I was just hired. I was an inner school teacher, and I spent all my life basically working in Selkirk, which is a former reserve, surrounded by Indigenous peoples. Half my life was at the Friendship Center, sitting with my auntie as she played bingo, and she could do 36 cards, which you should be able to work for NASA if you have 36 cards. And then most of my other life was just, studying to become a teacher. I traveled overseas a little bit, but whenever I did overseas, I always went to countries that, like I went to South Africa to watch the Mandela election in 1994 when I was 17 years old, which was a very rich experience. I just sort of lucked out in that one. I worked a lot with racial education, Indigenous education, and then I went to Calvin High School, which I don't know if you have been to Calvin, but in the year 2000, when I started, it wasn't a lot of Native people there. There was basically 1 or 2 Indigenous peoples in the hallways, and that was about it. But yet, there was the only urban Canadian residential school just down the street, which is at Anishinaabe Residential School. So there's certainly a lot of sort of undergirded history. And when I started, though, Bob Wilkes called me down to the office. He said, "Hey, Mr. Sinclair, come down to the office." He said, "Welcome to Calvin High School." I said, "Fantastic. I'm happy to be here." He said, "Are you ready to teach this year? Are you ready to do the big musical?" Because at Calvin, I was also the drama teacher. And so that meant that I had to teach the musical, and I had to do all the classes as well for drama. And so, and the way Calvin did it was they do the really big musical one year, and they do the really small musical the next year. So we're talking like 10 kids on stage or 150 kids on stage. I got the 150 kid year. And so he said, "Are you ready to put 150 kids on stage?" I said, "I'm ready, Mr. Wilkes." And he said, "Okay, here you go." And he slid the script across the table at me, and what was it? It was Fiddler on the Roof. Now, has anyone ever been to the River Heights area? What is right beside Calvin? There's St. Mary's Girls Academy, so you should know it's a bit of an affluent area, right? And then right on the other side of it is the Sherry Zedek Synagogue. Because there's a lot of Jewish students at Calvin. Like, Calvin is so Jewish that we used to have the pep rally with Santa Claus. And then Santa would come up and say, "Hey kids, ho ho ho, here's my friend, Hanukkah Harry." And then Hanukkah Harry would come in the gym, they'd hold hands and throw gifts to the kids. My point of it is it was a very Jewish community at Calvin. And I have to now teach Fiddler on the Roof. Does anyone know the story of Fiddler on the Roof? Here's a hint, it's about Jewish people. Jewish history, culture, tradition, you have to know about anti-Semitism. And I grew up in Selkirk, and I don't know if I knew any Jewish people, but I certainly never went to the synagogue. And now I have to teach the most Jewish musical of all time to the Jewish community, which I was not ready to do. And on my first day, I sat in my classroom and said, "What the heck am I gonna do?" So what did I do my first day? Anybody? I ran over to the synagogue. I said to the rabbi, "Tell me everything about being Jewish. I got half an hour. It's my lunch hour. Go." What did I learn? Not much. So I decided to do it kind of like the musical, like the movie, right? And I found there was this place, none of you would have heard about it because you're all too young, but there used to be a place called Blockbuster. That's right, yes, exactly. And I found the only VHS copy of Fiddler on the Roof. I decided we're gonna do it just like the movie. We're gonna dance like the movie. We're gonna talk like the movie. We're gonna do the culture like the movie. Turns out that sometimes Hollywood gets culture wrong. Does that shock you? So the kids were like, that's not how we speak. That's not how we do our ceremonies. That's not the way that we dance. That's not the way we talk. And so I quickly realized that I needed help. I needed families. I needed kids to teach other kids about who they are. I needed grandparents to come in and help with the sewing, with decorating the scenes to make them truly respectful and authentic. And then I also had to recognize that I needed language. So I needed to bring language teachers in and to be able to understand and work with language and words. And one of the really great things is when you start inviting people into a community, you hear amazing stories. One day we were having pizza, and we're all sitting around. We finished rehearsal, and we were sort of sitting there having lunch, and it was on a Saturday afternoon, and one of the grandparents sort of started telling us the story of his family's escape through Poland from the Nazis during World War II, which I was spellbound. All the kids were spellbound. We just sort of sat there and listened. And I heard about the persecution of the Jewish people. I heard about how when they came to Canada, they experienced more anti-Semitism, a culture, a language, a society that they weren't welcomed, didn't feel acknowledged, and they were still struggling to be seen, to be heard today. Now, I grew up in Selkirk. Does anyone know anything about Selkirk? Selkirk used to be a reserve. My family lived there from time immemorial. In fact, my family, my great-great-grandfather moved down from Fisher River with his family, settled in what's now Selkirk, connected with our other connections of our family through Norway House, and then eventually settled in that area, made a homestead, had a trap line at a place called Breezy Point. And then in 1907, the government of Canada came in with the RCMP and took us off the land and forced us to what's now Peguis First Nation. That's called ethnic cleansing. And that happened right here in Manitoba. We move Indigenous peoples all the time, whether it be for giving Germans and Scottish people or French people or name whichever group of people the land that Indigenous peoples are on. That's places like Steinbach, Morden, Morris, Carman, Brandon, Selkirk. I could keep going. Every single space in Manitoba, Indigenous peoples have been moved off and pushed onto reserves, and my family was one of the first. By gunpoint, we were forced to move to areas where we just couldn't make a living. My great-grandfather, who was a shipbuilder and a trapline, catching muskrats and fishing, couldn't make a living way up north where the lands were flooded out. There was no business, there was no opportunity. So he left the reserve, lost his status, came back and bought his former trapline off the Haberman family in Selkirk, a small German family that had been given all of our land. And for a few dollars, the Haberman family let us sit on our former lands. And a trap, and eventually my great-grandfather rebuilt his business as a boat builder. But still, my father talked about experiencing tremendous racism from the flooding of territories and others who had come who thought Indigenous peoples didn't belong there anymore, weren't supposed to be there anymore. And most of those people were police officers. They were people who, like mayors and city councils, and for many of them, teachers. Now, when I grew up, I didn't really hear a lot about that story because people didn't want to talk about it. If you go to Selkirk right now, there isn't a whole lot of discussion around the fact that Selkirk used to be a reserve. If you go see Chuck the Channel Catfish in Selkirk, there's a big statue there. That's the border of what used to be the reserve. It's called Selkirk Avenue. That's why it's called Selkirk. Everything north of there, that's everything from the former movie theater to town council to the main street to all of the different restaurants, and that's all former Indigenous territory, but no one wants to talk about it, or no one can talk about it, or no one's been taught to talk about it. On that day, when I heard the story of that grandfather after rehearsal talking about escaping Poland persecution simply because he's from a racial group that was thought to be deficient, lesser than, poor, not good enough, I realized that Fiddler on the Roof wasn't just a story about Jewish people, it was also a story about racism, persecution, hatred. It was a story about me. And so I sat there and I went, oh, that's fascinating. Fiddler on the Roof is about me. And I had a whole new vigor. I had a whole new sort of excitement. I had a whole new interest in the play. It wasn't just about those people. It was about my people, because we were talking about River Heights. We're talking about the kids right in front of me who had experienced that too. And we together had the language of let's perform, talk, and inspire conversations about what it means to live together. I'm not telling you that I put on the best musical of all time. We did sell out the gym, which that's what happens when you have 150 kids, by the way, 10 tickets each. All the math is perfect. Makes you look fantastic. But on the second night of the musical, guess who showed up? The rabbi. The rabbi showed up. And it was a gym just like this, and we performed on a stage just like this, and we performed. We did the show. We were cleaning up all the chairs after. The rabbi came up to me. He looked me right in the face. He goes, "Not bad." And then he walks out of the gym. Now, I'm not telling you that I became an expert on Jewish culture, tradition, language, anything like that. In fact, if it wasn't for all those grandparents and those parents and those kids who were very brave and generous and kind to somebody who didn't know anything about their culture and yet was asked to lead a project talking about their culture, I probably would have been lost. But if I can teach the most Jewish musical of all time to the Jewish community, you can do that with Indigenous education. And no one's asking you to become an expert. No one's asking you to go off and do a speaking tour. No one's asking you to write a book. At the very best, the top level, you do the greatest job possible, and the best you're gonna get, not bad. The thing that I was most happy about is I didn't get any letters to Bob Wilkes saying, "Fire this guy." I didn't get any hatred from any parents. You know what I did get? All those kids who are in the musical are all still Facebook friends with me. I've met all their kids. I occasionally am on planes, and I'm like, what is the kid who played the fiddler doing in first class? But anyways, I travel and I visit, and I've seen all of those kids who have done remarkable, amazing things. And then I realized something else. This is the most powerful thing really comes from age. Now, I just turned 50. Oh my gosh, that makes me feel ancient because I remember what it was like to be you. Like my understanding was I was told that the average age in the faculty is around 25, 26, 27. So you're all becoming teachers at a little bit older than I was. I became teacher at 23. No one should ever be a teacher at 23, by the way. Just a little note to self. Because most of my kids, I'm just joking, some of you are looking around going, that's me. Most of my students, by the way, were 18 and Friday night, what are you gonna do, right? You run into your students out there. When you're a little bit older, you're like, okay, maybe I'll go to this place instead of this place. But my point of it is that you start to sort of realize things when you get a little bit older, right? I'm at this sort of age of my life in which two things really interesting are happening. One is really sad. All the people who taught you in your life start to become very fragile, or they pass away. That's one of the hardest things that's happened for me over the past 3 years. Is both my parents have died. All of my traditional teachers, except for one auntie, have passed away. Every single person I went to ceremonies with as a kid, everyone who taught me the language, taught me how to dance, taught me how to sing, they're all gone. It's hard. Every week, we hear about somebody in our community who's passing. Then it begins the second thing. I remember this conversation I had with my dad. Some of you know who my dad is? My dad was the Commissioner Murray Sinclair, head of the TRC, wonderful guy. He went to every single classroom, boardroom, courtroom he was ever asked to go to, because he was a judge and a lawyer and did all these things. I said to my dad, I was very emotional one day, and I said to my dad, Dad, I'm not really ready for you to go. I feel like I need to learn more from you. I need to spend more time to get ready. What's it gonna be like when you're gone? And have you taught me everything? Have you shown me everything? Have you said everything I need to know in order to become the person that I need to become? When will I know I'm ready? And he turned to me, and he was in the hospital bed, and he was hooked up to dialysis at that point. He was fixed like this. And he turned his head to me and he said, "I'm not ready yet." That was really amazing for me to realize. There's a point in your life that's going to come, and it's probably going to come in your very first day when you are a teacher in front of those kids, and they're all going to walk in. You're going to be the person in charge. You're not the student teacher anymore. You're not the teacher candidate anymore. You are the teacher. And they're going to walk in, and you're going to be like, "Man, I'm not ready for this." You probably feel it now. Am I ready? You're sure ready to probably make money, but you're probably not ready for that day when they sit in front of you and you're like, "Okay, I know, okay, attendance, I can do attendance." And you're like, "Okay, I got that done." And then you're like, "Okay, here's my lesson plans I've been preparing. I don't know if they're gonna fly, but I hope they work." And then hopefully you have what I had, best thing I ever did, make best friends with somebody on staff who's teaching your class, and have them at all times, so when things go south, and they will, they're ready to help you out, both to let you, cry on their shoulder sometimes, but most importantly to say, "Here's a worksheet that I did, and it's very successful. Here you go." That first year, you're gonna need those people to really support you. You're never, ever gonna feel ready. Yet the bell's gonna go, and you gotta do it anyways. And that's the two things I've realized, being the age that I am now, after having done this thing. I've done now several careers. I was a high school teacher, and then I went on to become a graduate student person. I taught in the United States for a number of years, and then boom, here I am now as a professor. I don't even know what the heck I do now. I do write for a newspaper. I do whatever else I do. Never once ever, like I'm sitting in CBC, I'm about to speak to 5 million people. And my first thought is, what the heck do I have to say that's useful? You're never gonna feel ready. And the bell's gonna go, or the light's gonna go on, or the host turns to you. All you can really do is say, everything that's brought me to this place, all those amazing people who have invested in you, is at some point, they're gonna hand the mic to you. They're gonna say, "It's your turn." And do your best, believe in yourself, and believe that you have been brought into a place in which all these amazing people who are over here, the workshops you're gonna do for today, and all the education you've done, not just from the professors here, but all the people who have believed in you, who stood beside you, all of those people have led you to this moment. The world feels sometimes like it's burning. Doesn't it feel like it's burning right now? Right? Feels real tough. What I've been telling my students the past little bit is I've been saying to them, we may be facing, and every generation says this, but I really do believe it. We may be facing a generational shift right now. At the end of World War II, and I know I don't want to bore you too much with history, but you can look it up. There was what's called the end of modernity. Now what happened is at the end of World War II, which was the rise in fascism, rise of Adolf Hitler and the Axis and all of the different things that were performing terrible, terrible genocides all across the world, but particularly against the Jewish people, there was this moment in which America dropped the atom bomb in Japan. And it was this moment in which the entire world went, "Holy smokes. Like, we have weapons now that can destroy the world, everyone in it." And there was this huge moment of consciousness in which you saw the world almost reject all of the ideas that had come before it, that had divided, that had led to racism, immense genocide. I'm not saying the world shifted overnight, but I'm saying that flower power, 1960s bell-bottoms, and make love not war came from somewhere. They all came from a kind of rejection of the idea of modernity, which was that humans were always getting better. And of course, who are the humans always getting better? It was always Europe. It was always old white guys. And that suddenly people started looking at other people, going, oh, there's people in Africa say important things, and people in Asia, and people in the indigenous world say important things. And so postmodernity is now here, and for those of you who study postmodernity, you know that we've opened up in ways where the pendulum has swung in this incredible way, not fully, not perfectly, but now we are kind of in this interesting moment where we are now facing a real division where the old world, a world that is very much built on dividing and selfishness and capitalism, and this new world, which is looking towards trying to be inclusive, and they often call diversity, equity, inclusion, whatever, is coming to this kind of position of deep, deep conflict. And that means that you're going to be right smack dab in the middle of it. I remember when I said to my dad one day, because he grew up to be a lawyer, and when he was a lawyer, he spent his whole life fighting for social justice. He grew up in the 1970s right here in Manitoba, came to the University of Manitoba. There's only like a dozen students, Indigenous students, in this entire campus. Almost all of them lawyers. Phil Fontaine, Marion Meadmore, Ovid Mekrity. They either became a lawyer or a chief to go and fight for rights everywhere, because that was what Indigenous peoples needed. And so my dad did all this work as a lawyer. And when in the 1990s, when I was looking at what I was going to become in my career, I said to Dad, hey, Dad, I hear you can make $1 million becoming a lawyer. I'm going to enter law. And he goes, that's the stupidest idea I've ever heard in my life. You know why? He said, we don't need lawyers. You know what we need? We need teachers. We need nurses. We need doctors. We need social workers. So I looked at all those careers and I said, okay, which one's gonna make me the most amount of money? So I chose teaching. That's a total joke. I remember my first week as a teacher, I went, well, that's spent. Yes. Well, I chose teaching because I enjoyed it. It was good. It was a good career. It was also something, and don't take this the wrong way, it was the easiest degree I could get. I didn't want to spend a lot of time in university. And here's what I mean by that. Back when I did teaching, it was way different than when you guys did it. You could become a teacher in 4 years. And everyone's like, what? I only got a B.Ed degree. And if you want to become a teacher now, of course, you have to go minimum 5 and get a BA and a B.Ed. I think it's way better now. I think you get better experience. You're a much better teacher than we were when we were coming out when I was 23 and plopped in front of a group of kids. I'm glad that they have an extension now, but when I became a teacher, I thought, hey, I'm going to go out and try to do things to help and build and try to do things like try to change the world, because none of you get into teaching for the money. You get into teaching because you all have these crazy ideas that reasonability, education, and truth can change the world. That's why you're in this thing. You're in this thing because if you just believe, if you spend enough time with young people, if you help them along, if you make them into good citizens where they go out and they create positivity, kindness, generosity throughout the world, that you'll change it. That's why you're in this thing. That's why you're all dedicating yourselves to extracurricular, helping with the teams and helping at noon hour and making sure that all those students have experiences that you just didn't have or that you weren't interested in or that you perhaps didn't even know that you were interested in. I became the coach of the grade 9-10 girls rugby team. Another word for that is every Friday night in the ER. That was my whole gig. But that group of young women who I got to coach and help and was some of the best experiences of my career. I had no idea that I would like to do that, but it was fun. It was a whole lot of fun being with young people who got to learn an amazing sport, spending great nights. And yeah, we spent every single Friday night in the ER. But it was a beautiful time of my career. And so I said to my dad, okay, I'll become a teacher. And I became a teacher. And as I went through my career, I've started to realize that there are three main challenges that we're all facing in this generation, this generational shift that's right in front of us. The first is that we are facing a society that is changing economically. We're going from fossil fuels, we're going from an unsustainable, exploitative measure, especially when it comes to certain groups, immigrants in particular. We're changing an economy rapidly overnight into more technology-based, most, for example, what's often called blue-collar work. Those things are often going overseas. And so what we're often seeing is we're seeing this kind of high knowledge-based economy. And so you're gonna be at the forefront of that. You're gonna be at this big transition point in which you need to help the economy to be able to engage and work and transition for what has been historically, almost exclusively, an economy built on lands and resources, and exploiting those things, using those things, and therefore creating a lot of conflicts over those things. So you're gonna have to help educate people to both understand what the economy is and how they can move into doing something else that is less exploitative. Now we know for a fact, every single step of Canada, every penny on every paycheck, including your own, whether it be working at a Starbucks, or whether it be teaching in a school, or working at a university, every single penny comes from money that's produced from our lands and resources. Water, earth, potash, oil, gas. Whose land, or rather, whose territory, whose historical use and occupancy of that territory, they must be involved for every single step of the inclusion or the taking or the using or the mining or the drilling of that resource. Who must be involved legally, constitutionally, on every single drop of every oil in this country? Indigenous people. Every single inch of this country is historically used and occupied by Indigenous peoples. And that means that every single young person that you are teaching, particularly those in construction, education, nursing, health, child welfare, justice, like name me any occupation and I can show you how the most important thing that they're gonna need to know is how to work with Indigenous peoples. Every single industry. And if you're in Manitoba, by the way, 20% of us are Indigenous. I don't have to prove that to you, you all know that. I remember I used to hear my father, people come up to my dad, they'd be like, "You're the only Indigenous person I've ever met." I'm like, "Are you kidding? You're Manitoba. Like, what planet do you live on?" Every fifth person in this place is Indigenous. What I realized was, when people say that to me and my father, and they say, "You're the only Indigenous person I ever knew," I go, I don't think that's true. I think I'm the only Indigenous person that was a professional, or that was someone that you had to listen to, or someone that stood in front of an audience and held a microphone. Maybe that's true, because there are Indigenous peoples everywhere here. If we cannot work effectively together, we're gonna not deal with the biggest problem in our economy, which is that we've treated one group of people terribly, and it's very expensive to do that. It costs a lot of jails. It costs a lot of social welfare programs. It also costs us a lot in terms of all the things necessary for infrastructure and health. Like, go to the ER downtown in the HSC. Ask yourself, why are there 80% of the Indigenous, why in the ER, Indigenous people, 80% Indigenous people? It's because we suffer more from poverty, we suffer more from diabetes, we suffer more from obesity, because we live in an economy that drives Indigenous peoples into poverty, puts them into dangerous situations. Same thing with child welfare, same thing with education, same thing with health, same thing with blah, 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 and so on, and so on, and so on. If you can't work effectively with Indigenous peoples, you shouldn't work in Manitoba. This day, where you are learning about how to work with Indigenous peoples, learning about history, learning about culture, learning about tradition, is the most important day of your educational career. Because it's making you competent, it's making you employable, and it's making you capable of empowering those young people to make an economy that's inclusive, that people can be seen, and that we can build something different in the future. Now, brings us to the second thing, the environment. Here's the second biggest struggle you're going to face in your life, is that we have a changing environment. This year, 17,000 people were removed from northern communities, almost exclusively Indigenous, for wildfires. I haven't even told you that every single year, about 25,000 people are removed for floods because of increasing amount of water coming up from the south, increasing amount of condensation or extreme rain. My whole point is that the climate change is real, and it's impacting Indigenous peoples more than anybody else. We have to be able to face an environment in which we all should matter. And that means that we're going to have to help people, young people particularly, become aware, cognizant that this is becoming a big issue for all of us. We have to raise young people to understand that we got to do something together, and we got to stop leaving a group of people behind, because it's becoming not just completely untenable, but also very expensive. It's becoming a big issue for all of us, which leads us to the third issue. Here's the third issue. As we are becoming more aware of that all of us matter, like I'm gonna bet, and I used to say to people, hey, if you have an orange shirt, put up your hand. Don't do that, by the way. Because I realize that there are a few people who feel ashamed they don't have an orange shirt. And I don't want to shame people. We are the most inclusive society of all time. Like every single one of you have learned about Indigenous history, residential schools, the Indian Act. You've learned that democracy comes from Indigenous peoples as well as Canadians, French and English people. You've learned that multiculturalism is an Indigenous invention, not a Canadian invention. Canadians learn that from Indigenous peoples. You learn that the social justice system, healthcare, these are Indigenous ideas. That's where we come from. Friendly Manitoba starts with the fact that Indigenous peoples welcomed the settlers in and said, hey, have a cup of tea. Birch tea, you look a little scurvied up. That's where Friendly Manitoba comes from. It doesn't come from French and English people. They learned that when they came here, and then they said, that's a great idea. Let's all live together because the winter is coming, and it's like minus 50. Let's build the lodge together. That's where we come from. Now, as we begin to show each other what equality looks like, and we show each other what a society looks like when everybody matters, there are certain forces, ideas in the past that has said, oh no, there are only certain groups of people who matter. If you have your hair long, you're supposed to cut it. If you speak a different language, you're not supposed to speak it, especially in school. We're actually going to punish you, putting soap in your mouth. We're going to punish you by putting you in a place far away from your parents. And we're going to say, never, ever, ever go back to that hellish, superstitious, devil-worshiping community that you come from. Those ideas are still here. And for a long time, we've lived in a society in which there is great inequality. And so when we see equality, it's pretty scary. And people go, oh, look at those woke people. Look at those people who are fighting for, one or two people who look different, act different. Oh, why can't we just all go back to yesterday? Why can't we make Canada great again? Those are real forces, man. They are real forces. And if you want to see what that looks like when things run amok, just look south. That is exactly what happens when equality enters, and those ideas that are archaic, out of date, and absolutely based in inequality start to come back with a vengeance, man, with some real anger and some resentment. And not only that, but they say, we need to divide more. I get very nervous when I hear our politicians in this country say, we need to drive all of these economic projects through. Oh, red tape. We gotta get rid of all the red tape, which I always know is Indigenous rights. Our time is not to turn away from each other. Our time is to double down on each other. And that's what my book is about. My book is about, there's something special in Wînipêk happening. You know what's special? It's that every single one of you works with, lives beside, or is married to an Indigenous person, or a person from another culture. And that all of you are here today saying, we need to make a Manitoba that matters. Do you know why? We just did a provincial election where the central question was, are Indigenous women worth searching for? And the majority of Manitobans said yes. And then the rest of the Manitobans who didn't vote for that idea went, okay, let's try it. And a project that was deemed unfeasible by one political party in Manitoba that said, oh, it's $180 million, it'll take 2 years. The Manitoba government found them in 3 weeks at 1/10 the budget. Yeah, they were worth searching for. And we proved as a society that if we believe in the person beside you, if you believe in that person and you believe in that person, we can do anything. We might even survive this winter. Like we've done for millennia. Which brings us to the last and most important question. And here's the most important question of all. Like, what kind of country do you want? What kind of province do you want? What kind of city do you want? Do we want a city that is going to further divide? Be built in them, have people sleeping outside, and some people sleeping in really rich, amazing, beautiful homes full of marble and TVs? Or we want to be in a society in which everyone's going to matter? Where everyone wears an orange shirt, not just on one day, but every day? Do we want to live in a society that is built on the notion of treaty, which is that we're going to share everything? Like, that's what Manitoba is. Treaty 1 wasn't like, okay, let's take a group of people and make sure they're poor, full of diabetes and obesity, and one group of people have beautiful, amazing streets. No, we are a place of Pembina Highway, St. Mary's, Main Street, Portage Avenue, all Indigenous trading routes. We are a place that Indigenous peoples built this amazing place, and all of you get to benefit from it. And when the Jets run in the playoffs, we all cheer. Like we're all in this together. Like it's hard to say that this season. Or when we go out and one of the really great things is, remember when that Maclean's magazine came out and said we were the most racist city in the galaxy, or whatever the heck they said? They sent some reporter here for a coffee break, and then they put, Wînipêk, the most racist city in the galaxy. And then Saskatoon was like, yeah, they're the most racist. And I'm like, have you been to Saskatoon? Have you been to Regina? How about Vancouver? There's a guy named Robert Picton there who did atrocious, literally a genocide. And the guy just got away with it. The police let him get away with it. The social justice agencies let him get away with it. The city let him get away with it. Like, I'm telling you, Vancouver's got a racism problem. And you know the worst racism? Toronto. They're literally named after a Mohawk word, and try talking about anything Indigenous in Toronto, people freak out. The Toronto Blue Jays do one territorial acknowledgement, and it makes the front of the Globe and Mail. They're like, look at what they did. We're like, we do that like 50 times a day in Manitoba. Something special is happening here. Now, I'm not telling you we should pat ourselves on the back. I'm not telling you that we're perfect. I'm telling you that we got to keep going, and you're never going to feel ready. But look at what's been made. Look at your ancestors, both Indigenous, Canadian, French, English, Scottish, German, Mandarin, whoever you come from, Filipino, wherever you come from. You have come to an amazing, remarkable place, and you're doing it today. You're doing it. We're doing it, and we're taking a step. We're helping this world take these very big generational ideas and implement them, do them in our everyday life. And I have some news for you. Toronto ain't doing it. This workshop ain't happening out there. All these places that are the center, or think themselves as the center, the economic center, culture, or social, whatever it might be, they're not doing this. They're leaving it to others. And yeah, they're pointing one finger at us, but they're not looking at the three fingers pointed back. And when they look at us, they might be seeing that we are doing things that have never been done before. Like a day like this, having 3,480, I always screw up the number, 3,284 First Nations, Inuit, Métis students, the highest on-campus community at any time in Canadian history, right here at the University of Manitoba. Like, that's amazing. That's incredible. And not only that, but we also voted in a First Nations premier. That's never been done before. And have more First Nations, Inuit, Métis, women in cabinet, Two-Spirit people in cabinet. Like, we're trying things that have just never, ever happened before. And that's part of what the book is about. And most importantly, that's what the embodiment of treaty. Like, that's what the vision of our ancestors has always been. And you're doing it today. So I want you to be proud of yourselves. I want you to take that idea forth. And I want you to do something that's really remarkable. Because I see remarkable things all the time. Remember the Fiddler on the Roof crew? The young people that I taught in Fiddler on the Roof in the year 2001, when I did the big musical. It was actually 2000. It was the Christmas of 2000, just before the holiday break. We sold out Fiddler on the Roof. I got not bad from the rabbi. Well, all of those young people, they were all 16, 17, 18. I was 23. When I left, I went and did my graduate work for a while, and then eventually I had a daughter with my amazing co-parent. She works here, actually. Amazing, wonderful, amazing Cree woman from Saging, also from Pasquak Cree Nation. And we raised her up to be a very strong, proud Anishinaabe Cree young woman. She was so proud of herself. She started doing little things when she was in school. One of the things that she did in grade 9, when she started at Calvin, she said, "Hey, Daddy, I want to dance jingle dress at the school assembly." And I said, "That's a terrible idea. Don't do that." She said, "No, I'm going to do it anyways because I'm 14. No, she didn't actually. That's my last part I added, but she said, I said, "Well, what if somebody says something to you that's racist? What if she says something that's, what if people say things to you?" And when I was a kid, you never wore your indigeneity. You never brought it out. What you did is you hid it. I used to tell people I was Spanish. And they're like, "Aren't you Sinclair, the most Indigenous name in Manitoba?" I'd be like, "Sinclair, eh?" I always pretend I was Spanish. And so I said to Sarah, what if somebody says something to you? What if they grab your jingles? What if they, what if the teacher says something racist to you? I used to have teachers that would say to me, "Why don't you skip class like your cousins?" And I was like, "I'm being shamed for going to class? I don't understand." And I was like, "Well, Mr. won't say his name. I don't come to class because of you. I'm scared of my dad, but okay." I said to Sarah, "Well, what if the teacher says something bad to you?" She says, "Daddy, if anybody says anything to me, my friends will get them." Because you know what? Her friends asked her to dance jingle dress at the school assembly. And I went, you know what I realized? We have raised a generation of young people who've got each other's backs, who stand up for each other, who support each other. You know what happened with those kids from Fiddler on the Roof? They all had children between about 2003 to 2010. Sarah was born 2006. When I came back to town, I went to Oklahoma for a while, I went to Vancouver for a while, I went to Toronto for a while, then I came back here. And when I got a job here at the University of Manitoba, I decided to move back into the River Heights community because that's where I knew. And one of the great things is I got invited by the rabbi to come and give the Holocaust memorial reading at the Sherry Zedek Synagogue. What an honor for me to come in. And it reminded me that that work I had done so many years ago had impacted him. And then I started going to parent-teacher nights at Calvin a few years later. And I was sitting in the hallway, and I'm like, "Oh, there's Tevya. Oh, there's the matchmaker. Oh, there's all the daughters." All the kids who were from Fiddler on the Roof had kids at the same time as me. And they were all going to school together. Well, it came to grade 12 graduation. And my daughter really cared a lot about band. She did a lot of student council work, and she made a lot of friends. And when it came time to pick the valedictorian, guess who the kids of Fiddler on the Roof picked to be the valedictorian? The kids of the kids. Now, I'm not telling you that Fiddler on the Roof had anything to do with that, but I'm telling you that Fiddler on the Roof had something to do with that. Because all those parents met an Indigenous teacher in the year 2000, worked with, learned about, maybe even gained a little bit of knowledge about their own culture, but learned certainly about another culture and how they can work together. And they believed in this young Cree Anishinaabe girl, that she could be their spokesperson. And so she was. And that's the generation that we are producing. We're producing a generation that are believing in each other more than ever before, that are standing up for each other, and that got each other's backs. We are doing okay. We got much farther to go. My dad used to say, "We have shown you the mountain," talking about the 94 calls to action, and said, "Now we call upon you to do the climbing." He didn't say, Justin Trudeau will do the climbing for you, or Mark Carney, or Pierre Poilievre, or whichever politician you believe in, or even Wab Kinew. He didn't say, Niigaan Sinclair will do the climbing for you. He said, you have to do the climbing. And there's no one that he believed more than teachers, because that's what he encouraged me to do. Miigwech, everybody, and thank you very much.
It's okay. Thank you, Niigaan. As you're all aware, we have a Faculty Reads project in our faculty where we choose a book by an Indigenous author or authors, and we give that book freely to whoever wants to read the book and form a discussion group with peers and friends. So we have a group of B.Ed students sharing the stage with Niigaan and with me this morning, a mix of year ones and year two students who've generously volunteered to be part of this panel to respond both to Niigaan's book and to what he shared this morning. So I'd like to introduce you to Ash Wolf, Hannah Cole, Laura Cote, and Evan Prop.
Yes. Good job, you guys. You read the book.
And it was really important to me that they get to speak freely from their own minds and hearts. And so they've stepped up to assume the leadership for this next part. So it's with gratitude that I eagerly turn things over to Ash Wolf to start us off.
Are we good on this one? Awesome, thank you. Thank you to our tech guy. I appreciate the tech guy in my life. I married one, so I appreciate them. Before I begin, I just wanted to welcome and thank Professor Sinclair for being here with us today. Miigwech. It's an honor to be in conversation with you and sit alongside future educators like yourselves and who carry these stories in their classrooms. So as I lead this panel today, I know that I'm asking these questions as an Indigenous mom, thinking about the world my children are growing up in and what they're learning often without words from the systems around them. And as a mature student and teacher candidate, I'm also thinking deeply about what it means to teach responsibly inside those same systems. As I read Wînipêk, it felt less like a history book and more like a love letter to your daughter, Sarah. And as a mom, I just felt all the feels when I was reading it. And to future generations who are also going to be taught inside our classroom shaped by this place. And that framing matters to me because it reminds us that teaching, just like parenting, it's never neutral, there's relation, it's intentional, and it carries consequences for our children in our care. So my first question, and in regards to teaching as an act of love, as a mom, I read Wînipêk as that act of love towards Sarah, and as a teacher candidate, I'm constantly asking what it means to teach children well. How did writing this book as a father shape the responsibilities you felt as a storyteller, and what might that teach educators about the care required when we teach Indigenous histories to our children?
Okay, so good question. So funny, I've never really, of course I dedicate the book to her, but I didn't write a lot of columns thinking about Sarah. But then I've realized that as you said that, she had been with me for most of the many of the columns that I wrote, she was standing right beside me. And one of my favorite pieces is the part in Winter, where I'm talking about going to the Donna Mero concert, and then I met this woman on the street. Sarah was right there with me, and she was the one sort of talking to her most and sort of reminding me that I was talking to a grandmother, and that we need to spend a little bit of time there just to engage, help, listen to. We didn't have any money or anything, but we wanted to help that person. I want to just say that I'll talk about it as a kid, okay? So, because I've learned more about probably being a parent from my dad than I've ever learned from anything that I've done, right? So, my dad was never home, like ever. And so I was mad at him for a long time. And I was mad because my dad seemed to me to be more interested in fathering the country than he was to father me. And he never came to any of my soccer games, never came to any of my events. And so I was mad at him for a long time. I was mad at the country for a long time too, because I was like, why the heck can't you just fix your racism so dad doesn't have to keep talking to you about it all the time? And that was really upsetting, really angering for me for a long time. And it was only when I became a father when I realized that what he was trying to do was not just talk to people and help them and help all the Indigenous youth that he was encountering, but he was really trying to help me to enter a world and a profession in which I would have a little bit of an easier time. And so Dad's job was to open up doorways for people, but particularly Indigenous young people, to come and become professionals. So he's the first Indigenous judge, and now there's 13 Indigenous judges in Manitoba. We have as many judges, by the way, in Manitoba as there are virtually in the whole country. Like, just think about that for a moment. And so there are, and then of course, Dad also went to every church he was invited to. He went to every classroom he was invited to. He went to every boardroom he was invited to. And that's what I do now. So I do all this work, and of course, Sarah's off in Ottawa doing her orchestra. She's a flautist, and so I don't have to worry so much about her. She's off being independent and doing her life and her career. But for a long time, I really wanted to make sure that I was present, but that I was also trying to make a world better for her. And this book is indicative of that, I think. So I hope, anyways. Yeah.
Take this one. Thank you. Hi, Niigaan. Thank you for being here. The following line that really stuck out to me in your book was, "This place is ground zero in Canada's future. In this place, we find some of the country's most crucial front lines of reconciliation." And I know you touched on this in your opening keynote. We said this work isn't happening in Toronto. This work isn't happening in Vancouver. Surely isn't happening in Saskatoon. But as future educators here in Wînipêk and Greater Manitoba, it seems crucial that we do good work here to pave the way for the rest of Canada. Without minimizing work done across Turtle Island, can you speak on Wînipêk as an epicenter for reconciliation?
Yeah, I'm going to try to just modify your statement a little bit. It is happening in Saskatoon and Vancouver, sort of Toronto, but it's just not happening often. And like, for instance, that's my little joke about Toronto. Like, they do one act of reconciliation a year, and it makes the front cover of their newspaper, And so, like, I think that the important thing to realize is that this involves constant, consistent engagement. That's my final chapter. My final chapter is you have to engage, or like you have to commit, learn, act, repeat. Commit, learn, act, repeat. And that's what my method is that you have to be able to really commit to yourself to learning from the person beside you. And 1/5 of the time, it's going to be Indigenous. But you're going to learn also from people who have come from incredible places to be here. And they have really rich experiences. Mennonite, German, French, Ukrainian, Like, my best friend is Ukrainian. And man, have I ever learned a lot about dignity and resilience and what it means to really fight for your sovereignty from the Ukrainian people. And so there's lots we can learn from everybody, but in Manitoba, more than ever, you will learn how to live here through Indigenous people and through Indigenous culture and tradition. And so because we do that consistently, we need to not puff our chests out, because we also have more murdered, missing Indigenous women and girls, Two-Spirit people than anywhere else. We have more children in the child welfare system, in the jail system. So we are making similar mistakes that we have inherited, and that we are making our own mistakes completely on our own. And I think one of them was saying 4 Indigenous women in the landfill weren't worth searching for. Like, what a bunch of, can I swear here? What a bunch of bullshit that was. And I'm glad that chief of police is gone now. Maybe he should have been fired that day, because we don't need more division. We don't need more hatred and racism. What we need is we need people who are doubling down on each other and who are saying that everybody matters here. That's what we need. And we need visionary leadership who's going to do it. And I'm not saying that this premier or any other premier we've had are perfect or are doing great things, but I'm saying that we have to demand more of them every day. We can't accept garbage like people aren't worth searching for, So anyways. All right.
Awesome. Our next kind of guiding point is what children learn without being taught. So in the chapter Killing Birds, harm feels quiet and normalized. And as a mom, I know my kids are always watching and learning even when there's no lesson planned for the day. What do you think children are absorbing about violence, land, and responsibility in Canada? And how should educators, such as ourselves, reckon with the hidden curriculum that operates alongside what we formally teach?
Well, I think I'll say 2 things, 2 quick answers to this. So the first is that we have to teach children. If there's one goal I think we should all commit to in our teaching is let's never say the word empty land or middle of nowhere. These phrases are built in terra nullius. They're built in the idea that the land is empty and that there's no life that matters in these places. The deer matter, the bears matter, the water matters. And by the way, if we don't care about those things, we're all gonna die. We can't breathe. We can't breathe out of cans. So the point of it is that if you spend time with young people are inherently curious. But that curiosity can turn very quickly into domination or hierarchy or feelings of dominance, And what we teach them is we teach them through language, through ideas, that the only way of dealing with the earth is developing it or turning it into something that make money. There might be really value in seeing the land as a beautiful place or Lake Wînipêk as an alive being, which is what Indigenous peoples have been talking about for a long time, right? That the earth has animacy and life. And so I think my hope would be that if there's anything that we can teach young people is that there's not just one way to relate with the earth and it's through taking, but giving.
First, I'd like to say thank you, Professor Sinclair, for sharing your stories in your book with us and for your time today. It's an honor to meet and speak with you. In your book, you talk about your experience working with Mama Bear Clan Patrol. Especially for those here who have not yet read, can you speak on the importance of intentionality with our language and the harms that can be ingrained when we refer to community members as homeless? One phrase that really stuck with me from your book was, "These places are their homes."
Okay, yeah, so I would never claim to be the expert on Mama Bear Clan or the situation of people in the frontline poverty in downtown. But I've worked in frontline poverty for 30 years. So my first work was actually with the Salvation Army in the 1990s when I was a university student. And I was a crisis worker at a place called 180 Henry. And so I worked with our relatives. The reason that I worked with our relatives in the downtown is because it's not because of any altruistic purpose, and it certainly wasn't due to any religious value. It's because my grandfather was one of those people. My grandfather slept outside when he didn't have any money. And when he did have money, he slept in the McLaren Hotel, which is right downtown. Because that was the place that he used to find the most opportunity, a place where he'd get the job to go up north to work in the mines. Nobody would hire a disabled Indigenous veteran. So he actually has a lot of positive memories there. And of course, we have to remember that that place was the economic center of the city for a long time. But now what it is it's a place of great struggle and addictions and pain, because of residential schools, because of people who have treated people particularly badly, and of course the great deal of conflict that comes from people who are inherently struggling. We have to realize that, of course, that was the center of your lives at one point, and you all drive through that place. You all drive through the North End and North Point Douglas and the West End, these areas that are often considered economically depressed, or, that place or those people. That's your people. That's your center. Like, it's literally your center. And we should spend more time with it. We don't need people tweeting out that there's a bunch of people who you don't like down there, or that you think are stupid, or that you think are terrible, or that you think are somehow flawed in some way. Nobody chooses to have diabetes. Like, I don't remember, it blows my mind how many times you have to say that to people. Nobody chooses to sleep in a tent. Nobody chooses to live in a life in which you are inherently struggling with addiction. Like, everybody would want to live with their family, would want to live in a positive, safe environment where they're surrounded by amazing kids and nephews and nieces. And so if we start to see each other as people who all matter in this place, then I think what we realize is that there may be terms like homeless, but maybe we might be able to see that people are just trying to create a home. They're trying to create an environment of love. They're trying to create an environment of intercommitment. And here's the amazing thing. If you walk with the Mama Bear Clan or the Bear Clan or Anishinaabe or 204, these are people doing incredible work. And many of them supported by non-Indigenous peoples, people from churches, people from social justice agencies, but it's Indigenous led. And when they go to the downtown area and they work with people who are doing some struggles, you realize that there is ethic in tent cities that you actually never see in certain neighborhoods that rhymes with Barleswood or Lanscona. You actually see people who care about each other more in a tent city on Higgins than you see in certain areas of this city. People who look after each other's stuff. People who are generously trying their best in the worst of circumstances, minus 50-degree weather, and people around them who are really going through a hard time, who are desperate. They're not stealing. What they're doing is they're trying their best to, it's like when people are drowning, they're grabbing onto anything to try to stop from drowning. And sometimes that means taking other people's stuff. Sometimes it means harming each other. Sometimes it means people who are, really saying things and believing things or doing things that are really harmful to themselves mostly, not even to each other. But, and what you realize is that the only cure to that is love. The only cure to that is believing in the person, believing in that person, they're doing their best to try to, on that day. And they aren't drinking, they aren't doing drugs, they're taking medicine. And that medicine ain't leaving them to a good place. But that medicine is trying to numb, take them, give them an escape, give them a place in which they're trying to go somewhere. And most importantly, they're trying to find a place. They're trying to find a place in the universe. And when you start to see that, then you realize that we're all in this together. And that's actually been the struggle of Wînipêk. The biggest struggle of this place has never been colonialism. It's never been racism or hatred. The biggest problem of this place has been winter. And the only way we overcome the winter is by working together, not turning away from each other, turning together. And that's how we solve winter. And so, we got a big problem with winter. We got people who are, minus 50 degrees today. They don't have gloves. They don't have a sandwich. They don't have water. Let's do that first. And then second is let's then get them some love and assistance and places that they can go. And that's where the warming center came, in which I talk about in the book. Building the warming center so that people can see opportunity, get them resources, and then most of all, be in an environment in which they can reach out and engage other people. When the pandemic happened and they closed the libraries, that killed lives, it killed people. Because now you cut off the only way people can email their family. And that was very insensitive, very violent. And we thought, it's just a library. No, you're talking about a lifeline for people. And that's how we need to think. We need to always be thinking about our relatives. Just like you think about your auntie or your kids or your nieces or your nephew, we need to always be thinking about our relatives in everything we do.
Speaking of relationships, for future teachers in the room, what does it mean to approach teaching not as neutrality or objectivity, but as a relational act, one that will shape how children understand themselves and their place in this world?
It took me a long time to realize that lesson plans, while very important, I'm looking at all the profs here, might not be the center reason why you're teaching. The most important thing of why you're teaching is to help people believe in themselves. That might be the most important thing you ever do. And math is just the mechanism to get them there. The theory or the textbook is just a mechanism to get them there. Content is important, but it's only about 20% of a student's day. 80% is what they learn in the hallways, on the intercom, in the office, in the library, in the gym. Ask a student, what's the best part of your day? None of them will say algebra, or Romeo and Juliet, or phonetics, like whatever. They're going to say their friends, or if you're lucky, you. And your job is to try to figure out, not to become people's friends, but to have people understand what respect means, what does it mean to live in an environment that's safe, and most importantly, to be in an environment in which they feel inspired. That's what teaching's about. Teaching is not about just memorizing, and anyone who tells you otherwise is only focusing on the 10 or 15%. And what happens the other 85% of a student's day? So.
Hello, and thank you as well for coming here and sharing with us. I really appreciate that. I'm going to go off script for a little second here, but my grandfather, who was a farmer, always talked about if you wanted to get the most out of your land and get the most out of your farm, you had to, when you were plowing or seeding, find a fence post, keep it in your line of sight, and go on a straight line. And to me, I always think about that because these kind of days and what you shared, this is a fence post for us to find and keep on that straight line and doing the good work. So my question, I think you answered in a large part with this story of the fiddler on the roof. But I'm wondering if we can draw some more maybe advice out of this transition that we're all on of moving from learners to educators. And it's part of our careers as teachers, but in our lives too, like making that jump to being leaders. Is there any advice you can offer for that transition?
I don't know. I'm still a learner. Like I really am. Like I'm learning all the time. And my now 20-year-old or 19, 20, I don't remember how old she is constantly reminding me how little I know. So that, so I'm not really sure you ever stop learning. And I would say that at some point, one of the best advice I ever got was from my thesis advisor at Oklahoma, is this Creek guy. And he's also a green corn dancer. So he took me to a green corn ceremony one day. And he was always saying to me this phrase. He said, you can just write your thesis forever and tinker with it, or you can publish it. Like, you can either just write all day or or try to move on to the next step of your life. And I never really understood. I was like, I don't know. I never felt we're ready and prepared. But I realized something when he took me to this green corn ceremony. And he said, we were learning how to dance. There's a certain way you have to dance, and there's certain steps. And people take their whole lives to learn these steps, but I was just going one time. We dance all night. We start at dusk, and we go all the way till the morning. And we do medicine in the middle of the night, and then, so, there's lots of different things that happen with that medicine. But we dance all night. So we're talking like 10 hours of dancing. And there's no stopping. Like, you're not allowed to, you can stop for water, and there's often water breaks or medicine breaks, but you're generally dancing for 10 hours. And I remember I was learning for the first hour, and I was dancing with Craig, and he was a leader, so he has to go to the front. But he was staying with me for the first little while, and he was trying to teach me. And I was always screwing up because there's a certain double step you have to do. And he said, well, I'm going to leave you now. And I said, well, I'm not ready. I don't know. And he goes, well, here we go. And so he just left. And I think that there's a point where you just have to realize that what you've got is what you've got. The preparation that you've done, or lack thereof, you will learn then about how to prepare for next time. And then you will also realize that you actually probably know more than you think. And sometimes I think one of the greatest things about teaching is it's like a little test every morning of like, how am I going to dance in this moment? Or how am I going to, find and improvise in this moment? And this is where I think the most important thing about teaching is realizing that you're all learning together. And there's no point at any time in teaching in which I ever felt like I was smarter than anybody. I think what I did was I maybe knew a little bit about this, but I definitely didn't know much about this. And as I spend more time in classrooms, and I often drop into classrooms now, am I ever aware of how little I know about the world these days? Because the world is shifting and changing like 6-7, like what's 6-7 about? Like, I don't know, I'm very lost about this whole thing. But like, my point of it is like this world is changing very, very quickly. And so I think as you get older, here's something amazing that happens. When you're 20, 22, 23, when I was 23, I actually thought I knew a lot. I thought I was pretty darn smart. And then as I'm getting older, I realize, actually, I know almost nothing. like I know this much about the universe. And that little much I'll share, but I really have to listen as much as so I mean, listening to your students is probably, I think, the most important thing, and I always appreciated that my students, the relationship that I'd built with them, because I was doing very interactive things like English and drama, there was lots of opportunity for that. But I also think you could do that in every subject.
Couple more questions? Good, Wayne? One more? Okay. Teaching towards a livable future for our little ones. Teacher candidates are often told they're shaping the future, but Indigenous kids are already living with the consequences of both past and present decisions. And from an Indigenous matriarchal perspective, where children are already in relationship with these outcomes, what responsibilities do us as educators, institutions, and storytellers carry right now?
Every Indigenous teacher is a unicorn, meaning that like there's a million reasons they shouldn't have got there. And so for every Indigenous teacher that I've ever met, I say, you deserve a parade. And then I turn to the teachers who work with them and I say, you deserve a parade too. You should all have a parade. Because the fact that you are sticking together and you're working together, there is, you're doing something that has never been done before. But for Indigenous teachers, the workload is, I think for all racialized teachers, but particularly Indigenous teachers, and I think also for women too. I would say young male kindergarten, younger elementary teachers might be similar in some sort of boat. But there are overburdens to certain particular areas of the profession, but Indigenous teachers have to do 4 times the job as everybody else. We don't just teach kids, but we also teach our colleagues, and we teach the administrators, or we're the personal consultant for all things administrative when it comes to Indigenous education in the building and then often in the division. And then the last thing is when any parent, any community member, any Indigenous person at all comes in the building and they're mad about something, or they've been feeling concerned about something, or they don't go to the office, they come to you. They're like, what are you gonna do about it? And so you become this sort of advocate, counselor, curriculum consultant / all jack of all trades. There was one point, I was the drama English teacher. I was teaching all the grade 10 social studies labor classes because I was teaching them about treaty. And because all the teachers said, oh, I can't teach the treaty lesson. And my first thing is like, what have you been doing for 30 years before I got here? Maybe you just never taught it? So my first thing was, okay, maybe I'll teach it. And then my always thing at the end is that you get one freebie. I'm not doing this forever. You can watch me, I will encourage you, and I'll stand beside you. But like, my job is to inspire you. Like, you have to teach this if you're in Manitoba. In fact, you're an incompetent teacher if you can't teach it. You're doing a disservice to those young people. And so I'll do this for now, and yeah, I'll do the overworking now, but you need to pick up that work. There is nothing wrong with the non-Indigenous teachers teaching Indigenous things, not formal culture, but the principles of who we are, the treaties, the most important thing is that you have to teach, like, what does Manitoba mean? What does Kanata mean? What does Wînipêk mean? All Indigenous words. Like, that's to become just a competent teacher. You have to teach that there's Indigenous math and science, and that those things are as rich, if not more rich, about learning what life is here. You have to teach Indigenous phys ed and health and economics, because all of those things will actually help us get to a future in which we can all breathe and we can all live together and we can all like live in a place like that we don't have to constantly be hooked up to the matrix. That was my terrible ending right there. But my point of it is, like, all of those things make us better as Manitobans, and the country needs this more than ever. And they need us to do this. They need Saskatchewan to do it. They need Northwestern Ontario to do it, which are similar population bases. But there's something special about this place, man. There's something special about this place that we are doing here that we need to be proud of, but we need to not rest. We got to double down now. We got to speed up, if anything. Because in fact, those young people, and when I tell the story at the start, I say those young people are not waiting for that statue at the legislature. They're just going to go and make one. And those young people, when they edited the statues at the legislature, my dad tweeted out, he said, "Oh, that's vandalism. This isn't reconciliation." And so I phoned my dad. I said, "Hey, Dad, do you think you had something to do with this?" He goes, "No, I would never tell them to vandalize." I said, "Dad, every single one of those people were young people who believe in themselves and know that Queen Victoria was the most violent monarch of all time. Do you think they're just going to tolerate having this huge statue of her while no statue of any Indigenous person at all at the Manitoba legislature? No, they're going to do something about that, and nobody got hurt. There was no violence. If anything, it looks kind of prettier now. There's orange and red on it." And Dad goes, "I'll take the tweet down." I said, "Dad, you had a hand in making people feel proud of themselves. We don't get to say what that means when they're proud of themselves. And sometimes when those young people are proud of themselves, they're going to do things that we may not always agree with or that we always condone, but man, that we got to trust that we're doing good work to try to encourage them to do this in positive ways." I think editing a statue or two probably made some good change in our communities. I think voting in a government that says Indigenous women matter is a good thing for us. I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm not saying it's the only thing we need to do. I'm saying that we're trying something. And most importantly, believing in each other might be something we want to keep trying to do. It's a much better ending than The Matrix.
Miigwech. All right, quick closing reflection. Miigwech again, Dr. Sinclair, and also Wayne for having us here and our panel. You guys are amazing. I just want to close by returning where I started. As a mom and as someone preparing to teach, when I read this book, I didn't just read it as history or critique. I read it as an act of care. Father writing towards his daughter with hope that she is going to grow up knowing where she comes from, what this place has demanded of Indigenous families, and how deeply she is loved. As an Indigenous mom raising two girls, I carry similar hopes and similar fears. My children, like so many Indigenous children, will sit in classrooms shaped by the choices educators make, what stories are being told, what silences are being maintained, and whose lives are treated as central rather than peripheral. And for teacher candidates in the room, I hope this book asks more than what you will teach. I hope it asks how you will teach, who you are teaching toward, and what responsibilities you carry when Indigenous kids are in your care. I want to thank you all again. Miigwech, Ekosani.
Thank you. I want to echo that thank you. We have about 10 minutes for audience questions. So I did remind you in one of my newsletters and emails that if you have a question, we have 2 microphones here. So we have about 10 minutes. So I'd really urge you to come up and ask a question if you've got one. Or make an observation. A comment, yeah.
Don't all rush. I thought I was done for the record, but these guys also have 2 more questions. You want to, if there's no question here, then do you want these guys to? They only got their one, so.
I'd like to give you a chance. Yeah. Anybody?
It's the 10 seconds of awkward silence.
Yeah, let's just wait a second. I see movement, just twisting. Yeah, go ahead. Come on up. Yay. There's a microphone right up here.
I I just want to say I think the silence speaks for itself. We have nothing to say. Thank you.
Okay, go ahead, Evan or Laura.
Kind of going back to our conversation we had about Mama Bear Clan and the work being done there. I'm not from Wînipêk originally, and when I moved here, I did catch the feeling that there's something different happening here, and wanted to work in spaces where I could be helpful. And I'm just thinking, as a non-Indigenous settler person, is there any tips and tricks maybe for entering spaces and filling roles in helping out communities, marginalized communities, and in Indigenous spaces that, without being self-righteous or acting like a savior?
So I guess the first thing is I completely understand, and we use this term in Indigenous Studies a lot, like settler colonialism or settler people or whatever the term is. Remember that treaty was never meant to create settler Indigenous, because the purpose was for our children to marry. The purpose was for our children to work together, live together. And then, of course, the problem, of course, with children is they meet each other and fall in love and make babies. And that's what I certainly feel, my daughter being in Ottawa and having a boyfriend. I'm like, damn it! I wanted that to stop, but my point is that, so the point was never to have the term settler Indigenous. The point was for us to be together. If anything, I would say, our point was to be Wînipêkers. That's so inappropriate, that term. That's why I don't often use it. I would say, we should be Wînipêkers. And then I goes, oh, that sounds so inappropriate. But that's really our point. Our point was, so if you read the word if you read my book, I talk about Wînipêk as being the ecology, right? The life of this place. And that includes everybody. Like all the rain that falls from our bodies, our shampoo, our oil fracking projects, our sewage in the water, but also the deer that are buried in the soil, everything that falls into this place ends up in the water and then goes to Lake Wînipêk. It's the bottom of the Great Lake. My whole point is that we're all supposed to be together. We're supposed to be interactive. That doesn't mean that we give up those terms, Indigenous and settler, because we live in a society that's full of capitalistic division. It's a very real term, right? But at the same time, is for us to realize that we're supposed to be working, living, being together. And what I mean is that when Katarina Vermette wins the Governor General Award, you should think to yourself, that's one of ours. That's amazing. And the same thing, like one of the great things, we did a round dance for my dad the other night. And we had 2 Wînipêk Jets show up. Trevor Kidd, and he was never a Jet, but he works for the team. And then Ray Neufeld, and I said, hey, I'm so glad you guys came. And they're like, this is ours too. We did this. Your dad was ours too. And that's what I love, is one thing that my dad really did that I'm so proud of, and if there's anything that I hope that I attain to in my life, is that people see the work that I believe in, that I'm trying to do, that I'm trying to, not just in terms of this, but also Mama Bear Clan. Like when I do Mama Bear Clan, you know what I do? Is I always walk around and I wave at people who are in cars. Not because I'm trying to show what I'm doing, I'm trying to say, look what Manitobans are doing. You're in this too. Interact. Realize that everybody in this neighborhood is your relative too. And so I go up to people's windows and I do this, freak them out, because truly, we ought to see each other. And that's what territorial acknowledgements do. They help us see one another. And then we have to take action. That's where the second statement comes in. And so think about that as a method for your life. The method for your life is now, your job is to first see people, see everybody in our community, everybody. And then second is do something about it. Do something about it. And that doesn't mean like go off and become a philanthropist and go work at this agency over here. That means that helps young people see it. Talk about it in the Tim Hortons that you go to with your uncle, who maybe would never listen to anything that, maybe they're reading certain websites and talking only to certain people. And you're like, why don't you talk to the other people too, their uncle, sort of thing. And that's my point, is that, every single one of the persons in this room have work to do. And it doesn't involve just teaching. It doesn't involve just going out and becoming the active social justice fighter. Like, your job is just to see people and then help others to see them and then do something about it together. Because you're going to realize that there's a lot of injustice, a lot of division, a lot of problems in health, justice, education, as there's those three industries alone, and you get to be one of those three. Thank you. Question over there now. So maybe this is the last one. Yeah, you're done.
Thank you so much again. And my question is, as educators entering the field as teacher and educator in the role, and as you said, something special is happening, right? Certainly here in this faculty and in Manitoba. But oftentimes I wonder, what advice would you give to educators entering in buildings where they may be more aware, more knowledgeable about Indigenous pedagogy, working with Indigenous students, than the veteran teachers, whom they might depend on, like you said, for survival. Sometimes even their school leaders or the divisional leaders. And would you have any advice for new educators entering the field? How do they navigate that tension? Thank you.
Yeah, when I started teaching at Calvin, of course, I became those four things, right? And I was suddenly the consultant of all. I was 23 years old and doing PD workshops on every single. When you have PD in our school, they would be like, "Oh, Niigaan, you're not going to our PD on brain research. You're going to go give the PD over here at the school over here." And so I was doing PDs at the age of 23. I had no idea what the heck I was doing. And then on top of that, they got me to do that at staff meetings, right? So I'd walk up to the staff meeting. At the time, Calvin was 110 teachers. And about 70 of them had been there for 30 years or more, 20, 30 years. And so they'd real veteran teachers, right? And so whenever I would walk up to the front, there was this group of people. I'll call it the wall of folded arms. And the second that I walked, they were like, "Okay, Niigaan's going to come up and he's going to talk about our progress on Indigenous education." This was the year 2001. And of course, 9/11 had just happened. There was all this kind of hyper-awareness around race and things like that. Anyways, so I would literally see my colleagues, who were generally nice guys until it came to anything that they determined to be, work for them, or I guess you'd call it woke now. Anyways, they would do this. And it would be this like wall of folded arms. And that frustrated me for a long time. And I don't know if you remember, but there was a teacher at Calvin High School who had posted a number of things about the Grand Chief of Manitoba. And anyways, I won't say that one of those guys was him, but anyways. But, guess what happened? So that teacher who was sued by the Grand Chief of Manitoba for saying racist things online, he was forced by the court to give to go through cultural awareness training when it comes to treaty. And there was a series of educational topics that he was required to learn from. Guess who he taught to teach him? Guess who had to go to Smitty's for 4 Sundays in a row and do personal workshops because he asked me to? Do you know why I did that? Because he's my colleague. Because we were in the trenches together. And because he did the woodwork, he did all the carpentry on Fiddler on the Roof. Yeah, man, that guy had said some really terrible things. Here's my point is, I've never met a teacher who is not invested in the central idea that kids matter. Like, those teachers that leave at like 3:32? The bell's at 3:30 and they leave at 3:32? Like, I get it. Like, if you teach for 30, 40 years, you got your stuff, you know what you're doing, your 1-2 clubs that you do, you leave at 3:32, I get it. Even that guy, even that person cares about kids. And just spend 5 minutes listening to them. They love kids. Like, why else do you do the job? You don't do it because you hate it. And I meet teachers who are jaded, who are bitter, who have been run down by the system. But if you talk to them, they still love kids. And so try to find what they love and why do they love it. And most importantly, sometimes, it's a carrot and a stick. So sometimes you have to say, let's see these kids. You're actually a better teacher when you do this. And sometimes when you're working this way and you teach this, why don't we try teaching this and you actually get a better lesson out of it, more efficiency. You can do this other thing here. And sometimes you just have to remind them that this is like the most important employable skill for young people. And if you don't do this, you're actually doing a disservice to kids. You're actually not doing your job. And frankly, you're walking yourself out of your job. There's the carrot and there's the stick. And I don't mean to be mean when I say that, we all have to innovate as teachers. That's part of our gig, that's why we do professional development. And so what you say to that teacher is, this is part of growing as a teacher, because it's the most important employable skill. It's far more important than science and math, is learning how to work with Indigenous peoples, because you can't actually do science and math without working with Indigenous people. You go out and you try to do science, let's say that you're going to do archaeology in Manitoba. Well, half the projects you're going to do, or 3/4 of the projects you're going to do, are going to be involving Indigenous communities. And every time you put a shovel in the earth, you're now involving an Indigenous right. So you can't do science without learning how to work with Indigenous peoples, period. There's one guy standing now, I'm not sure. We've started a tsunami.
Oh, no. Okay, one short question.
Yes, good morning. I wanted to speak to something that I think ties directly into the pregnant pause that filled the room when the Q&A session began, which is the feeling of trepidation in the face of a colossal task. I understand the intentionality behind your anecdotes, speaking about doing Fiddler on the Roof and feeling like, who am I to teach culture to the people whose culture I'm teaching about. What do we do, especially those of us like myself who benefit from generations of racially motivated injustice? What do we do with these feelings of being overcome by the task, this huge responsibility that we have in trying to break down these barriers as educators? What do we do in the face of that?
Yeah, that's good. It's a great question. We all have suffered from injustice, everybody. Because as my grandmother pointed out to me one time, she said, Niigaan, I never met Indigenous peoples growing up. I was like, Grandma, you're in the paw. Literally the OCN is right there. But you know what, for my grandma, it was true, because Indigenous peoples weren't allowed to leave the reserve. So my grandma, my French-Canadian grandmother, she was legit when she said, I never met Indigenous peoples, but she said, one day, I heard a knock at the back door, and I went to that door. And there was 3 Indigenous kids there. She said, I remember this. They were 7 years old, and they were selling stuff they were making at the residential school, like mitts and hats. And they tried to sell it to me, and I didn't have any money, so I just sent them along their way. And as they were walking away, I wondered, where are their parents? She said, I wonder, why are these 7-year-olds selling stuff door to door? Isn't schools paid for? And you realize something. My grandmother was kept away from learning about residential schools or Indigenous peoples or anything involving the injustice that was over the river, that there was a slaves institution over there where kids were being driven into slavery to raise money for their own servitude. And she went, holy smokes, And part of that was that that didn't make her a bad person. What that made her is inheriting the same violence that we have experienced. We all inherited that. And Canadians have been often taught that they didn't inherit that. And they're only suddenly waking up to the fact that every Canadian was taught that Indigenous peoples were not a part of your life, but they were. Literally, look on your driver's license. There's Indigenous words all over it. You all drive on Portage Avenue. You all drive on Pembina Highway. You all drive on St. Mary's. Those are all Indigenous trading routes. So you've benefited from Indigenous peoples probably far more than you've experienced injustice. You've probably experienced a lot of injustice because you've been taught that Indigenous peoples don't matter. So now you're realizing, they do matter, and everybody's mattering in our community. And it does feel very overwhelming, but oftentimes it's overwhelming because it's the first time, you're the first generation to face truth. And that truth means that yes, we got to talk some hard things, but I actually think we got to talk more about the good stuff. We got to talk about the beautiful stuff, the amazing stuff. And the amazing stuff is that we're all treaty people. The amazing stuff is that we're all going to build this amazing economy together. And we're going to do something that's never been seen before. One thing that I'd say is, I don't think we should be scared of this Port of Churchill project. Maybe it might be something good, maybe it's not. But most importantly, we're trying things that are really remarkable. We've got more, we're talking about more about each other in content, in curriculum, more than ever before. You're never going to do it all at the beginning. But one little step leads to another step, leads to another step, and then pretty soon you're going up a mountain. And remember that the mountain's only amazing if we all get to see it. And if we all get to see it, then we all get to share our perspectives and ideas, and then we realize there's so many more mountains to climb.
Miigwech, thank you very much.
I think we can climb that mountain better together, and I think the exchange of ideas and questions from the panel and Niigaan's response, and from those of you in the audience, has really helped us to move one step closer as we climb that mountain. So I want to thank Niigaan again, the panel, and all of you who have participated, so please join me in that thank you. Okay.
Oh, no.